The year was 1971, a time when the world was obsessed with raw, unbridled power. In the heart of Los Angeles, a city built on the illusion of strength, a real-life showdown was about to occur that would challenge everything we thought we knew about human biology. The venue was the Los Angeles Sports Arena, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat, liniment, and anticipation. This was the International Strength Athletes Exhibition, a place where legends were made of iron and bone. But among all the heavyweights and world record holders, there was one name that struck fear into the hearts of any challenger: Margaret the Mountain O'Brien. Standing at a staggering 260 pounds of dense, functional muscle, Margaret was not just a champion, she was a force of nature. For 7 consecutive years, she had reigned as the undisputed world female arm wrestling champion. Her bicep measured 19 inches, larger than the thighs of elite sprinters, and her grip strength was legendary, rumored to be able to crush a padlock. She had traveled the globe, from the underground gyms of Moscow to the high-stakes arenas of Vegas, and she had never not even untasted defeat. To Margaret, strength was a simple mathematical equation. Mass times gravity equals victory. She lived in a world where the biggest person won, and on this day in November, she looked across the arena at a man who weighed exactly half of what she did, never imagining that her 7-year streak was about to end in a splintering crash of oak and bone. That man was Bruce Lee. At 140 pounds, Bruce was the complete opposite of everyone else in the arena. He was lean, wiry, and carried himself with a predatory grace that seemed out of place among the lumbering giants. He wasn't even supposed to be a part of the exhibition. He had come to support his close friend Dave, a powerlifter who was competing in the heavy deadlift category. But as Bruce stood near the arm wrestling stage, his presence began to act like a magnet. The Dragon was already becoming a cultural phenomenon, and when a group of sports journalists recognized him, the crowd began to shift. Margaret O'Brien, intrigued by the sudden commotion, pushed through the crowd to see what the fuss was about. When she saw Bruce, she didn't see a master of martial arts. She saw a small movie star who looked like he belonged on a fashion runway rather than a strength stage. Margaret, never one to shy away from a confrontation, approached him with a smile that was more of a challenge than a greeting. "I've seen the movies, Mr. Lee," she said, her voice booming over the noise of the arena. "The high kicks are impressive for the cameras, but in here, we deal with the cold reality of physics. I outweigh you by 120 pounds. Do you think your technique could survive 1 second against my right arm?" The arena went silent. It was the kind of challenge that defined an era. Bruce Lee, ever the student of human mechanics, didn't take offense. Instead, he looked at Margaret with a calm, analytical gaze. He wasn't looking at her as a woman or a champion. He was looking at her as a biological machine. He saw the leverage of her long forearm, the density of her deltoid, and the anchor point of her shoulder. He realized that this was the ultimate laboratory for his philosophy of Jeet Kune. He replied with a quiet confidence that sent a chill through the journalists standing nearby. "Mass is an impressive tool, but it is often a clumsy one. I would be honored to test the limits of my structure against the limits of your power. Let us see if the wood can handle what the muscles cannot." The exhibition organizers, smelling a once-in-a-lifetime publicity stunt, immediately cleared the main stage. They positioned a professional-grade competition table made of Swedish Oak in the center spotlight. This table was designed to withstand over 4,000 pounds of pressure and had been used in hundreds of heavyweight bouts without so much as a scratch. As the 260-pound champion and the 140-pound philosopher took their seats on opposite sides, the visual disparity was so absurd that some people in the crowd began to laugh. They thought they were about to watch Bruce Lee's arm be snapped like a twig. Before we get to the moment the table actually shattered, I want to ask you a question. If you were standing in that arena in 1971, who would you have bet your money on? The 260-pound world champion who had never lost, or the 140-pound martial artist who claimed he could redirect her power? Let me know in the comments right now. I am curious to see how many of you believe in raw size versus technical skill. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are uncovering the hidden records of Bruce Lee that Hollywood tried to bury, and you don't want to miss our next deep dive into the vault. Now, back to the soundstage. The referee, a veteran official who had seen the strongest men in the world compete, stepped between them. He carefully aligned their elbows on the padded surfaces and ensured their wrists were straight. As their hands clasped, Margaret's massive palm completely engulfed Bruce's hand. It looked like a biological mismatch of the highest order. The referee called out the instructions. Ready, go. Margaret, being the professional and not wanting to actually hospitalize a film star, started with roughly 30% of her power. She expected the match to be over in half a second, but something strange happened. Bruce Lee's arm didn't budge. He hadn't just used his bicep, he had locked his entire skeletal structure into a geometric wedge. His feet were bolted to the floor, his hips were rotated into the table, and his spine was a rigid pillar of energy. He was channeling Margaret's force through his arm and straight into the floor. Margaret's eyes widened. She increased her output to 60% and 80%. The veins in her forehead began to throb. For the first time in 7 years, she was meeting a resistance that didn't feel human. It felt like she was trying to push over a skyscraper. As the match crossed the 2-minute mark, the crowd was in a state of total shock. The 140-pound man was holding the 260-pound woman at a perfect standstill. This is where the numbers game becomes truly terrifying. Bruce was using a concept he called non-telegraphed resistance. He wasn't fighting Margaret, he was flowing around her pressure. Every time she tried to shift her weight to gain a new angle, Bruce would make a micro-adjustment of his wrist, a fraction of an inch, ensuring that her force vector was always slightly off-center. He was making her 260 pounds work against itself. Margaret was growing frustrated. Her breathing became heavy, and the scent of ozone and strained wood began to fill the air. The oak table, a masterpiece of Swedish engineering, began to emit a low, guttural groan. The fibers of the wood were being compressed between two impossible forces. On one side, 260 pounds of championship-winning mass. On the other, the concentrated structural integrity of the dragon. The fact versus fiction aspect of this story reaches its peak at exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds into the match. Margaret O'Brien, realizing that her reputation was on the line, decided to put an end to the dragon once and for all. She gathered every ounce of her 260-pound frame, braced her feet against the stage, and delivered a singular, explosive surge of 100% maximum power. It was a move that had ended the careers of Soviet champions, but Bruce Lee, with his 0.05-second reaction time, sensed the spike in her muscle tension before she even moved. Instead of bracing harder, Bruce did the unthinkable. He released his resistance. He went completely limp for a microsecond. As Margaret's massive force met zero opposition, her own momentum carried her arm downward with the speed of a falling anvil. But in that same window of time, Bruce snapped his shoulder back into place, delivering a short force redirection pulse. The two forces, Margaret's 100% downward drive and Bruce's lateral kinetic pulse, collided at a perfect 90-degree angle right at the center of the table. The sound that followed was described by witnesses as a detonation. The oak table didn't just break, it exploded. The grain of the wood split lengthwise, sending splinters flying into the air as the entire surface collapsed down the middle. Both competitors were thrown forward into the wreckage, their hands still locked together in a grip that refused to break even as they hit the floor. The referee stood frozen, his whistle hanging from his mouth, staring at the shattered remains of a table that was supposed to be indestructible. The 3,000 people in the arena were so quiet you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Margaret O'Brien stood up, her face pale, looking at Bruce Lee, not as an actor, but as something else entirely. "I've wrestled giants," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I've never wrestled the earth. You didn't beat me with your arm, Bruce. You beat me with the world." The aftermath of this event was suppressed for years by exhibition organizers who were terrified of the liability and the damage to the strongman brand. They declared the match a null and void result due to equipment failure, but the damage was done. The Swedish manufacturer of the table actually flew engineers to Los Angeles to inspect the pieces, convinced that the wood must have been defective. Their report concluded that the wood was perfect, but it had been subjected to a shear force exceeding 4,000 pounds level of pressure that no human being was thought to be able to generate in a seated position. It was the perfect storm of mass and redirection. Margaret O'Brien would later admit that this 1971 encounter was the reason she retired 3 years later. She said that once you feel that kind of power that breaks the tools of the trade, you realize that there are levels of existence that muscles alone cannot reach. Bruce Lee walked away from that arena with a deep bruise on his forearm and a renewed belief in his be water philosophy. He had proven that size is a limitation if you don't understand the science of the strike. This is the numbers game that defines his legacy. He wasn't a superhero. He was a man who had mastered the geometry of violence. He understood that 140 pounds moving at the right angle with the right timing is more dangerous than 260 pounds moving in a straight line. As we look back at the broken oak of Soundstage 12, we are reminded that Bruce Lee's greatest gift wasn't his speed or his fame, but his ability to show us that the only real limits are the ones we accept. He didn't just break a table. He broke the illusion that the small must always fear the large. He proved that when you master the mind and the body as one, you don't just win fights, you redefine reality itself. And that is why 50 years later we still talk about the dragon in the mountain and the day the earth stood still on a piece of Swedish oak.